Delhi takes pride in saying we're the EV capital.
Where did the thought come from कि हमें एक wind solar hybrid 7 gigawatt plant बनाना है?
Today, India has emerged as the most stable economy in the world.
There is a lot of anxiety, human anxiety around charging. That anxiety, at least in my mind, is long distance.
Our next generation, all the colleges, schools should say, I can't live in 500 AQI.
Nearly 50% of vehicles in China now are either electric or hybrid. How does India get there? Welcome back to another episode of EV Powering India. Today, we continue to talk to the pioneers of the EV industry in India. I have two guests today, and for both of them, sustainability has been a big part of their life and their careers. My first guest is Manoj Kohli. From building Airtel to leading SoftBank India's bets, he now backs what he calls the next frontier, clean energy and climate tech. My second guest is Mahua Acharya, leading India's electric bus transition or shaping global climate finance. Mahua has consistently worked at the edge of what's next. Let's dive in. Okay, so my first question for both of you is, do you own an electric vehicle?
Yes, my second one.
Second one.
Yes.
And what's your experience been?
I love it. I mean, it's like buying a Mac. I would never go back to a Windows machine.
Okay, and how about you?
I have a hybrid,
Hybrid.
and it's fantastic.
And why did you choose a hybrid?
No, this was before COVID,
Yeah.
more than 5 years back. And I felt that maybe the charging stations may not be there at that time. But luckily, immediately after that, my community had charging station in the apartment building. So if I had waited for some time, I could have gone straight for EV.
Yeah.
But I have hybrid now.
Okay.
And it's very good experience.
I just want to understand, आप लोग के point of view से, does owning an electric vehicle make sense? And it could be, so one is, does it make economic sense? And second is, does it make environmental sense? Or is it just because the cars are so fancy and good technology, that's what attracts you towards electric cars?
We have to replace our second car. It's getting to the point of needing to have it replaced. And I'm waiting waiting to make a decision on what's the second electric going to be. Now,
So you'll have two electric cars.
we will have two electric cars. Now, right now, we've got the second one. That keeps me happy that in the time that in case we want to go to Jaipur, let's be honest, it is still quite difficult, even though I myself worked on it. Quite difficult to find the charging stations. I don't know if they work. I don't know if they'll have power. I don't know if they'll have cables. I don't know. And the I don't know factor is my plan B car for now. What attracted me to it, this is my 5th year with an electric. Does it make sense operationally? Absolutely. My bills are less than 1,500 rupees a month in charging.
And have you ever got stuck
No,
without charge?
absolutely not. Never. So I must say something on this charging. There is a lot of anxiety, human anxiety around charging. In my mind, that anxiety, at least in my mind, is long distance. I can't actually go from here to, we went out recently and I did have to take our patrol car. That's the anxiety. Inside a city, I don't think outside of the office, I don't charge anywhere else. I charge home or stationary when it's sitting in the office.
Do you think electric cars make sense environmentally?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Purely from just electric vehicles, electric cars, electric vehicles, just first and foremost pollution. Second, economically, our diesel bills. I mean, our diesel bills are just rising. Diesel, I don't know if diesel prices going down. They go up. So purely from a pollution point of view, from that diesel point of view, which makes more sense, of course, then it's public transit.
Yeah.
Right? So cars are, from pure economics of the user, not that sensible yet. Economically, not that sensible yet.
Because the cost of buying the cars is higher, that's why?
Because the cost of buying the car is high and because the number of hours that you end up using it for is that much less. Most of us have a car that goes and does scheduled pickups and drop-offs. It does school runs, it does office runs and a few grocery runs. And outside of that, it does weekend travel. So if you don't run your car and run it a lot, it doesn't make economic sense. So for personal passenger cars, that's the fundamental issue. That is the trade-off with the cost. It's much more expensive for now.
मेरा अपना व्यू ये है that commercial use and public utility vehicles make a lot of sense, but personal use vehicles still don't make either economic sense and even environmentally, because we don't run the vehicle so much, perhaps don't make that much sense. And also जो commercial use है उसमें भी I guess there are certain use cases that are very high utilization where they make a lot of sense. Maybe not all use cases.
With all electric cars, electric vehicles, the more you drive it, the more sense it makes, more economic sense it makes. So when you're talking about a personal car for personal use, we don't use it relatively that much or comparatively to other types of transport. Most of us that own electric cars, or most of us that own cars, do scheduled drop-offs and pickups. It does school runs, it does office runs, and over the weekend it does a bit of groceries. But outside of that, it's not moving that much. So unless you use the car a lot, it won't make that economic sense, just simply because for the most part, most of them are that much more expensive than their competitor ICE or their competitor fossil fuel cars. Now, if we have, every time you go into a showroom and you want to buy a car, you should be able to, ideally, as a consumer and in a functioning market, you should have an electric one that competes with everything else, just like it does for petrol. You want to buy a petrol car, there are about 5 in a certain price segment. We don't have that yet.
Yeah.
So it's also hard to comment thereafter because you just don't have the competition yet at price points.
Okay. So let me also, talk a little bit about your journeys and at what stage environment, climate, sustainability came into your lives. So maybe we'll start with you. I think whilst aapne, you've created large organizations, etc., and I think people think of you as an organizational, institutional builder. But I think आपने sustainability पे बहुत काम किया है as you were building institutions.
Okay, I was always passionate about environment. And I was always unhappy that 300,000 towers we had built all over the country used diesel.
So 300,000 towers were
using diesel and having diesel generators, and not only sometimes 2 of them, because we had to power in many parts of the country, and it needed 24-hour DGs in isolated areas, in highways, and all over the country, Assam, Kashmir, and so many places. Not good. I was not happy with myself
at that time.
Yeah. But in 2015, when I joined SoftBank after Airtel,
yes,
I got this great opportunity. And I felt at that time that there are 2 major impacts I can do myself to health. One is the renewable energy, other is the EV. So these are tangible steps towards better environment. So on renewable energy, we invested about 3 billion. We built 7 gigawatt of solar and wind and hybrid, which is both together, all over the country, in Rajasthan, in Andhra. The first plant was 455 megawatt in Kannur in Andhra, which we commissioned 51 days before time. And that taught me so many lessons, which were replicated in bigger plants, 800, 900 megawatt in Rajasthan. So that was a fantastic experience, where I felt that from fossil power, from thermal power, we are moving so well into renewable power. And now government fortunately has initiated nuclear power in policy, which is good because this intermittent renewable energy power can't replace base load of thermal energy, but nuclear can definitely. And nuclear is clean. The second experience I got was on EVs, and again a very tangible contribution I felt, where we initiated Ola Electric, and today Ola Electric has 1 million EV capacity for 2-wheelers, both scooters and bikes. They're doing nearly 500,000 already, and I think about 5 gigawatt hours of battery We already were doing 1.5 or so earlier. Now, this year it will be 5 gigawatt hour of battery manufacturing in India, lithium ion, which I think was very important because India were far behind China. So these are the two very good experiences I have, and luckily I feel gratified that I initiated something which will help the environment. And I'm much closer to, I'm also part of a board which helps solar and wind energy for guzzlers like steel, like cement, like data centers. These are guzzlers of power.
Yes.
So we are providing from that company, providing power to these guzzlers and replacing the thermal power. So I think this has been a very, very great learning decade, I'll say, on sustainability.
So I just want to maybe deep dive a little bit on some of the things you said. But before that, where did the thought come from कि हमें एक wind, solar, hybrid 7 gigawatt plant बनाना है? What is the source, the origin of that thought?
The thought was, in macro way, it was in two thoughts. One, that India's next generation, my children, my grandchildren, and our next 2-3 generation need a better environment. Clearly, today's environment is not suitable for good health. And I'm not talking only the top 5-10 cities. I'm talking of huge parts of India which are suffering from high AQI. That is one. Secondly, nationally, we import about 120 billion plus of petrol and diesel, which is avoidable. And we should do our best to avoid it or minimize it. And in the long run, eliminate. Not only the forex goes up, but it leads to so much pollution. So I think that was the second major driver in my mind. And finally, of course, Masa, who was the chairman of SoftBank, he's a visionary.
Yes.
And after Fukushima disaster in Japan, he felt that we can do much more in renewable energy. So that was the basis.
And इसमें challenge क्या है? I mean, of course, with SoftBank, maybe financial resources were in abundance, but what about ground reality, policy, how to build the infrastructure, technology?
No, challenges are many, but all are overcome. For example, in renewable energy, it's issues of lands. Land acquisition is a big issue, not easy, but governments are helping. Transmission capacity enhancement is a big issue. For example, you'll be surprised to know US doesn't have any transmission capacity left for next 5 years. So up till 2030, US doesn't have transmission capacity. So it can't expand. India, fortunately, has planned better and much more transmission capacity is coming up, especially in the green zones of Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Kinti, etc., where a lot of solar and wind are coming up. So that is second big issue. Third big issue is that these are new industries. So there are many policy inconsistencies which have to be cleaned up, which government is trying its best to clean up.
And this is at central or state level, both?
Both. It's more central, but there have been some experiences with states where states have been a bit tough on the industry.
Yeah.
Which is not good. Because a new industry has to be nurtured. And here I want to give example of China. I think they took a big, bold leap. And I think time has come for India to take a big, bold leap. After the last 10 years of experience of both renewable energy and EV policies. So we have kind of experimented many policies and seen some working, some not working. The time has come to become much bolder. Because we have to take a huge leap now in the next 5-10 years. Till now, I think we have taken steps which are useful steps, but not big steps.
आपने चाइना की बात करी, and I think it's fair to say India is far behind China. The question is कि how do we start competing with them, or do we even need to compete with them? Nearly 50% of vehicles in China now are either electric or hybrid. How does India get there?
So, I don't think we are talking of competing with China. We have to do what is right for India. And I think right for India, as I said, our environment has to be more friendly.
Huh.
Our imports have to go down, oil imports, which are huge. And economically, it's good for us to do it. Economically, renewable energy and EVs are fantastic for India, for the nation.
Yes.
Personally, for individual consumers, yes, sometimes it's higher starting price, but as Mahua said, the operating cost is lower,
Yeah.
much lower. For companies, by the way, solar and wind are close to half the tariff of thermal. So already it's making economical sense.
Yeah.
I feel that we have reached to that stage where much more bolder policies, much more support. For example, if government wants to support these two big drivers of environment and pollution control and, of course, forex control, I feel giving some part of that import substitution, what we will save, will be good for us because we are actually doing it for India.
So I think, but if you think of it, technologically, China is far more advanced and they also control a lot of resources, lithium resources as an example. So the question is, are we then moving away from fossil fuels that are controlled by a few nations to lithium and lithium-based electric vehicle technology that is then controlled by China?
So let me clarify this point. I think this is a misunderstanding in minds of many people. There are two major areas where we are lagging behind China. One is solar modules, which luckily the PLI scheme has started well. There are many solar module companies now who have initiated manufacturing in India. It's a matter of another 3 to 5 years, you will see India becoming very highly self-sufficient by maybe by 2030, which is great. And even exports to other parts of the world. The second area where we are lagging behind is the batteries. And there, it's not only about lithium ion, the other battery technologies which are now coming. And lithium, for example, can be imported from other parts of the world, from Latin America, from Africa, so from Australia, and India also. There's been some finding here. So we have sources which are not controlled by somebody, and they can be utilized by us. So I feel there are solutions for India to forge ahead with much more confidence.
So India perhaps need bold policies, but also bold entrepreneurs. But as an entrepreneur, my experience here is that a lot of times policies are not necessarily built for new startups. They are built for large institutions. And therefore, smaller companies, startups, entrepreneurs have to face a lot of challenges to actually build large organizations. And you also spoke about Ola Electric. I don't know where the thought originally came from, but they've obviously had a very audacious plan.
So let me clarify this again. Government policies are for everyone. And you're right, courageous entrepreneurs who have courage should go. And there are two examples which I have been personally involved. One is Sunil Mittal, who's been one of the most courageous entrepreneur. The only company which has survived last 30 years of telecom. We started with about 50 companies. Now the only company left out of those 50 is Airtel.
Yeah.
So the moral of the story is a courageous entrepreneur can survive and do well. The second is, as you said, Bhavish. I'm with no experience of battery, no experience of EV, no experience of manufacturing. He took that courageous call. Not easy. By the way, the capacity of Ola is third after BYD and Tesla.
Wow.
Now, and the competition is ferocious because our brands are high quality brands, very good companies, which are basically. So the point I'm making is you need bold policies of government coupled with courageous founders who will take the steps.
Yeah. So, Mahua, you studied environmental studies at Yale. At that age, why did you think about environment?
I went to a school that for us it was normal to be planting trees. In those days, we were planting trees because the area that the school is, it's Rishi Valley in Andhra Pradesh. And in those days, it was very dry, that area. And although we were in a valley, the place around us was quite arid. So it sort of started with that, and your engagement with nature was just normal. I didn't know anything else. I spent my life in a boarding school. That then evolved into a definition of, I think I'd like to be able to do something about our environment. Again, but at that time, we were doing very basic stuff in India. We were doing things like regulations and please check that you have done an assessment before a factory comes up. So I started, in fact, by a little bit of activism back there. And then very quickly realized that the way to fix something is not through activism.
And activism is what, planting trees or?
No, I think I can't remember so much of my childhood, but I do remember that in early college days, I definitely used to feel that we should do better. We in India should do a better job of protecting our natural resources, given that we have been deriving from it in India, our medicines, our water, our everything. We've been, as a system, as a culture and a society, quite intertwined with natural resources. But very quickly, and then of course I moved off into studying economics, but resource economics. Because in my mind, the way to address things at scale is to use a market. Just plain old use a market. So how did I get in there? It wasn't actually, I didn't sort of stumble into it. I was lucky enough to have some sort of a drive in my mind, and then lucky enough to get into a school that offered it. If I didn't get in at that time to Yale, I'm not sure what else I would have done. I would have looked for some other university. But I was just lucky to get into a school that offered exactly that sort of leaning, that I could use markets to address environmental problems. So I guess it comes, I go back many years.
So, if we think about India as a country, if we were to make a policy right now, an electric vehicle policy for India, what would that look like? What would be the basic framework of it? What are the big decisions we will take? And maybe there are some examples from various states, right? So, Delhi's had a very good EV policy. Telangana has been very proactive as well. And I'm just thinking, just taking one word from what Sir said, you need to make some bold decisions. Yeah. So what would those bold decisions be?
I would isolate these next level decisions. They need to be, of course, they need to be bold. We're too big to not be bold. We have functioning markets to not be bold. What would they be? As far as our EV vehicle, EVs is concerned, I would say stay consistent. We are very good at making very serious, big announcements. We need to be as good as ensuring that those announcements are translated into reality. So that would be number one. Now, often that level of boldness does not always transpire to we've got ages of policies underneath that. And sometimes you have to wade through those.
But can we, let's say, okay, my fundamental belief is that intra-city small commercial vehicles will convert 100% to electric. So two-wheelers, three-wheelers, to an extent four-wheelers, taxis, light commercial vehicles. Can we say, for example, all of these vehicles, all two-wheelers, all three-wheelers need to be 100% electric by a certain date? And do you think then all the states will adopt it, all the manufacturers will adopt it, or will there be a lot of pushback on it?
Policy signals are never to be underestimated. Never to be underestimated. Bold signals move markets. They wake up a lot of people, they wake up industry, they wake up entrepreneurs, they wake up markets, and they give a certain direction to an industry. That same statement made repeatedly definitely reinforces that the country is moving in a certain direction. Along with that, companies come up. That direction then converts into a policy. That policy stays, either it stays as an incentive, or perhaps when the market catches up and when economics work, it becomes a requirement. So for example, as some cities are beginning to say that our fleet have to be completely electric from X date onwards. I think that's a great signal. It gives enough time for the current fleet to finish their life. It does not disrupt any business that is currently operating. gives enough time for a new industry or new companies to say that this is actually a new market coming along. So states, of course, will respond. In my time in government, I don't think I came across even anybody that opposed anything green. I don't think I can see that categorically. So there's no shortage of willingness in our system to get stuff, to transition, to transform. It takes effort though. We are a federal system that have been federal for a very long time. We have states that have to work through their own machinery. We have the center to work through its machinery in some kind of harmony with the states. So in a way, what I was saying is, how bold, of course we've got to be bold, that's a given. We have to maintain that consistency of being bold and ensuring that the second level levers are in place. Where will we get our things from? Where will we get our supply chain from? A lot of companies need a bit of help sometimes, support in trying to secure this at scale and to secure it with some level of margin so you're able to maintain pricing. These policy signals and statements are never to be underestimated.
But okay, so let's say that now Delhi is probably looking at implementing a new EV policy, and they're saying that all two-wheelers and three-wheelers registered after a certain date should be electric. Do you think that's a good move? And is it practical? And should everybody adopt it across the country?
Delhi has had one of the most progressive EV policies that I have seen. Progressive and comprehensive. And the Delhi government in the early years was very receptive to making mid-cost corrections as and when they came up. So Delhi has been on a really good path. And Delhi takes pride in saying we're the EV capital. I think they have the legitimate right to say that. Everything you said is, I think, in a great direction, right? It's giving people the runway to make decisions. It's giving a signal to the markets that we're going to phase out and we're going to move in electrics from X date onwards. Two-wheelers make economic sense on their own. Three-wheelers, as you know, make complete economic sense. So it will move anyway. We have reached a point today, certainly in cities like Delhi and others, for two-wheelers or three-wheelers, that it will move because it is just cheaper, it is more economic to run in electric. Delhi's buses have moved over to electric. Delhi has had a public transit bus policy that they have stayed bold and consistent for a number of years. That it is now, I think I'd be quite surprised if there was any sort of course correction happening to any other form of fuel. So all of the above, I think it really, really, really important for all of us to stay consistent with that original bold vision and make sure that we've got the discipline to get it done.
So any thoughts on what should the government do? What are the big steps they could take?
Okay, let me share three major priorities.
Yeah.
Which I like to recommend and suggest to government. Number one, there are already goals of 500 gigawatt of renewable and 100 gigawatt of nuclear. I think getting these goals executed is more important now. Because we need G to G, green to green. All these cars and buses and trucks and two-wheelers and three-wheelers, if they are being charged by thermal energy, that's a bad news. I mean, then what are you doing? Till it is green to green, it has to be green energy charging all EVs. That is the first thing. Because if you continue to charge them forever with thermal, then actually you're already doing harm to the society and to the environment. So I feel that these two goals of 500 gigawatt of renewable and 100 gigawatt of nuclear need to be executed. Whatever execution issues are there, government should step in and make them easier for the industry to execute. Whether there are land issues or there are transmission issues, whatever, there are many other issues. So the policy is there, but execution is not as good as it should be. Second thing which is important, where government can definitely come in, and government is coming in through PLI schemes, is supply chain enhancement. huge enhancement of supply chain is required if this transition has to be completed within time periods of our targets. Whether it is modules, whether it is batteries, or any other motors, any other major supply chain gaps have to be fulfilled in this country and under Atmanirbhar Bharat policies, so that we produce here, we manufacture here, we get employment here. Cost may not be perfect in the first 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but after 5 years it will be perfect. Already, we'll be surprised to know the iPhone cost of India, manufacturing cost, is just 2% higher than China. So maybe in a year or two, it will be lower than China.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't have that hesitation that we start on a plus cost, we'll not go under. We'll go under. In 2, 3 years, Indian costs are good. You just need to get the capacities right, manufacturing capacities right, the automation right, all those things right. So that supply chain is able to serve the higher targets. Third thing is more about, I feel, serving these targets through fixed dates, as Moa said. I feel we need to be a bit more bold on that. Yes, there could be some resistance. Let's say we fix a date of 2030, December 2030 for some transition. Obviously, you will have some. We are a democratic country, so there will be some opposition. But we need to have public consultation. We should have huge public, war cry, where our next generation, all the colleges, schools should say, I can't live in 500 AQI. How can I live in 500 AQI? So if you don't stop this at this time, at some time, again, to give an example of China, Shenzhen and some other cities, already nearly 100% EV. So yes, the system is different. It's not a democratic system like India. But still, we should, like Moa rightly said, give a date which is futuristic and then stick to it, create a public opinion that date is right for us, that date is right for our future generation. And then transitions will happen. Industry will also follow it. People will follow it. Consumers will love it. Companies will love it. So I feel that this is where we need to be bolder within a democratic setup. So it's not that we are doing something else. We are being democratic. We are doing good for the society, good for our next generation.
Okay. And also, recently at the Startup Mahakumbh, a statement was made by the Commerce Minister where he said that Indian entrepreneurs are not necessarily building a very high, good technology, not competing with China, and that we are more focused on providing consumer services, delivery, etc. I want to understand what your take on this. I'll give you my take and then I'll probably understand from you as well. So I think if I just take one simple example of, let's say, a food delivery, right? Of course, you have many restaurants being created. There is a platform that is delivering food, but then there is also job creation happening at the back of that because there are a lot of gig economy that's evolving on the back of that. And then the delivery is happening through vehicles. And now we see, at least in Delhi, a lot of those vehicles are electric. And a lot of those electric vehicles are then manufactured by new startups. And of course, there's a technology that goes behind it, and that technology is getting upgraded every year. And there are companies like us, Refin, where we finance those vehicles, right? So a lot of one business is actually creating a lot of other businesses, and there is a lot of technology that goes behind running some of the, let's say, enabling businesses, right? So I think in some ways, whilst yes, technologically we're not as far advanced, but actually we're on the path to that. And a lot of businesses, one business creates a lot of other businesses. So I think in some ways, as a founder, I also feel a little wronged when such statements are made.
No, I don't think. Piyushji made this statement, and I will fully support this statement.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. Government as a father figure of a nation, any nation, has to give a clear message. And the clear message is that India as a country needs deep tech startups. And I advise about 25, 30 startups already. And I know, for example, how many have patents? Just to give you an example, Ola Electric has the highest patents in the country. but many others don't
I
have,
won't have it. Yeah.
and they should have. So it's a message which government is giving, not being critical of any. You are absolutely right. The food delivery guys have done a great job. Nobody is being critical of that. But I think we need to move on to the next level of evolution of deep tech companies, which bring deep tech into India, new technologies, really do R&D, invest in R&D, invest in new innovations, etc. This is also a message to investors who are coming into it, that please do invest in deep tech. Every government does it. Chinese government does it. US government does it. Recently, you've seen SoftBank investing billions of dollars in US behind AI-led infrastructure, AI-led data center, because there is a clear message from government that we want to encourage it. So I'm saying the message is right. India should move deeper into technology-based and Indian technology orientation. That is number one. Again, as a parental thing, government is worried about two more things. I'm not talking on behalf of government, but I'm just saying, what is their worry? Second worry is corporate governance. Why is this free money leading to such corporate governance gaps?
Yes.
Government is worried about it. It's a wrong message to investors or to new founders, new young entrepreneurs that you can do anything with this free money.
Yes.
You can't. It is not your money. It is public money, which you have to utilize very judiciously. That is second worry. Third worry in the mind of government is that why are many of these startups doing growth for sake of growth? Why are they not pursuing profitable growth? Profitable growth is the only way for future, so that these startups become economically, financially healthy. So I'm saying these are three very serious worries government has.
Yes.
Government from time to time gives messages. Not to belittle anyone's contribution. That is not the objective. Objective is to change the course of the country towards something different.
So, and then, I mean, you work with a lot of founders. So you've, in some sense, seen their struggles, their pain through their journeys. And then when somebody says on the back of that statement that startups are rackets, how do you respond to that?
No, it doesn't apply to 90% plus. It applies to that maybe 2%, 3% or whatever that percentage is. And those few percentages are definitely adversely impacting the reputation of this country, the reputation of startups of India. And let me tell you, investors get very, very anxious.
Yeah.
Because they are investing billions and billions of dollars into various companies, trusting the founder.
Yes.
There is inherent trust in the ethics of the founder. That is the starting point of all these investments. Business comes later. So with that trust being broken by very few investors, very few founders, who's not a good idea. And government has to be tough on this.
So, and you sit on boards of lots of companies. So how do you ensure that there is good corporate governance? What do founders need to do? Because see, as a founder, I feel sometimes we don't even know what good corporate governance looks like, because somebody has to advise us, somebody has to teach us that.
What I request the founders I work with is that they have to consider the investors' money and bank money as public money. That is a basic understanding. It is not their money, and that money has to be utilized to the best possible results in terms of profitability, in terms of free cash flow. If that doesn't happen, then these founders go the wrong way sometimes. And they feel that money is my personal money. I can use it. You can't use it. It is a very, very clear corporate governance issue. That is the issue. And I request all the founders who work with me accordingly that just maintain highest degree of professional analysis behind utilizing even 1 rupee of investors. And I can see with a few founders are creating a wrong message.
And do you think there are enough number of investors who are ready to bet big money on deep tech in India?
Let me tell you, last 5-10 years, there was some hesitation. Today, India has emerged as the most stable economy in the world. Even after last 3 months of changes in tariff issues across the world, India is still the most stable and fastest growing economy. And Indian rupee is doing well. Indian multiple sectors. It's a broad-based economy now. It's not about only 10, 20 companies on NSE. It is about 500 companies, 1,000 companies. So infrastructure is going well, manufacturing is going well, service sector is going well, AI-based software is going well. So many things. So I feel that now that hesitation is going away slowly. So investors are open to a longer period of investment. May not be 5-6 years, maybe 7-8 years, or even 8-10 years, so that the founders can be more bold and invest into deep tech.
And you think that risk appetite is there? Because when I started, I'm talking about early days, I met a lot of investors, and one common theme that emerged was, "Ye aur kahan pe hua hai?" Right? To say कि the business model I was setting up कहीं और successful है, then you can replicate it over here. And ऐसा कहीं नहीं हुआ है. I'm building something original. और वो बहुत वाइडली एक्सेप्टेड नहीं था वो कॉन्सेप्ट कि आप क्यों ओरिजिनल थॉट लेके आ रहे हो, कहीं और से लेके आओ और उसको कॉपी करके इंडिया में बनाओ.
Well, there is an evolution process. How India has massified technology, whether it is UPI or renewable energy is getting massified. Many technologies, robotics, drones, many technologies are being massified energy, which is very different from global process of evolution. So investors across the world now are getting surprised that India is really moving with a very different strategy, different direction, massification, which many other countries are not.
Not case.
So I think the confidence on Indian founders and deep tech, especially who are interested in deep tech, is getting higher and higher. But this is a process of evolution. It doesn't happen in Pania. It takes few years. I feel that you'll see in the next 5 years much more deep tech investments coming up, founders becoming much more bold, much more confident, and you'll see this change happen.
And Mahua, you become a founder now in an environment where a lot of founders are getting questioned because of obviously corporate governance lapses and things like that. Why did you choose this path?
You know, Samir, in any sample set of anything, there will always be a few outliers. And the same outliers will be there on governance, they'll be there on integrity, they'll be there on profitability. Some will be wildly profitable, some will be wildly unsuccessful. Some will be amazing corporate governance, and there will be these outliers that do things that are dampening to the ecosystem. I would tell a lot of my colleagues in government, if you have your moral compass straight, nothing in the world can stop you from getting scared. In the government, you would get a little nervous. We would run very big tenders. And a lot of my team sometimes would get a little nervous. And I will just keep telling them that, look, if you have your compass straight, I think you're fine.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing here. As, you're seeing investors would keep asking you, have you done this before? It's a sample set issue. Well, that's just human. A number of times people have asked me in my life, have you done this before? If I were to buckle with that, then, there is really, I'd be fighting an ecosystem against me. And I'm not interested in doing, in swimming against the tide. So you find your methods. I don't think that is bothered.
Yeah.
That if people are worried about corporate governance and, I can't do anything about that worry.
Yeah.
You wouldn't find it in most places. You wouldn't find it. There will always be people outside the sample set that are doing things that are a little questionable and unfortunate. And I don't think that bothers me. And I would tell a lot of my colleagues, my friends that, that's not what, that's not the norm. That doesn't bother me. I want to make one comment, on your question on the Honorable Minister's remarks at that Mahakumbh. There are two sides. In addition to what Manoj was saying, there's also another two sides of that coin. In our system, in any market, companies that will do well follow the path of least resistance. Anything, water finds its own level. So food deliveries work because of who we are as a system. Our roads are congested. You don't want to step out. It's easy. Food deliveries work because of economics. So it's great. I mean, I took a lot of that as a positive statement that many of our young companies, entrepreneurs are working. They've made it big. I think that's brilliant. It's really dramatic. It has not happened it happened only in the last 10 years. I don't remember in India 15, 20 years ago where you'd have this kind of development. So I took that as, wow, we've been able to get up and make a statement that we want the next generation of entrepreneurs in technology to come up. If just 15 years ago in a country as big as India, you would not be able to make that statement. So my response was, yeah, I think one group of companies that elect to do food deliveries and ice creams and whatever else, that's excellent. There will be another group of companies who perhaps want to do something else. Now, as a nation, if we want to move the country in that direction, I think it's only a matter of time before there will be bigger announcements, I hope, and there will be from the government. I just hope, though, that we stay consistent in our, in our boldness of vision. We've got to stay consistent in execution. And, with execution, doing things like deep tech, nothing is easy. It's not easy to do that. I'm not saying it's easier to do food deliveries, but it's also not easy. It also costs a lot more money.
Yeah.
You have many more touch points with the regulations. You have many more touch points with the systems and the policy and old institutions that are perhaps not always ready to receive this kind of interaction. So by execution, sometimes you have to almost wade through the procedures of difficulty against milestones, and you have to maybe be a bit strict, I can say, of getting that done. So if we want more deep tech, I would set a target. I'd put some money behind it and make sure that we help a few companies that are moving in that direction, because in national interest, we need it as an economy.
Okay, and you spoke about big government tenders, so we must talk about the bus tender.
Oh.
I just want to understand a little bit. So, I think it's quite exciting. I think, if I'm not wrong, then the bus scheme that you guys came up with in CESL, the running cost of the buses was 55 rupees per kilometer, and that would be compared to a CNG bus would be 80 rupees CNG?
Yeah, about 70.
70 rupees. Yeah, so there's a 20% cost saving on an electric bus, even though the upfront cost of that bus is perhaps 3 times more than a CNG bus.
Yeah.
How did that happen? I mean, how do the numbers work out? What's the financial structuring behind it?
So before I get into the financial structuring, Samir, a lot of India is yet to be developed. And what I mean by that is, if you want to do something in, let's say, electric vehicles, in the bus business, in the trucks business, the 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers, there's a lot to be invented and discovered from scratch. Or certainly a lot to be invented. Not every invention is that of material things. So our financial structuring that we put in is just simply, in my mind, this is a business model that we've got to create. It's a business model that must work for us. So the business model here was that we're so used to, or the norm is to buy the vehicle, is to buy the product and buy the vehicle, own the vehicle, and then manage, and then hope to manage it well.
Yeah.
Everybody has that endeavor. Data tells us that we haven't been able to manage it so well. It is, the new vehicles are also that much more expensive.
Yeah.
And the purchasing counterpart simply doesn't have the money. Our state transport utilities don't have the money to do this kind of thing. So what's your only choice? The flexibility lies not in changing the institution. The flexibility lies in how you design the delivery of something. So we design the delivery of services. I think I'm now slowly coming to the conclusion that certainly for India, if you want to scale, turn that into a service. Find a way to turn it into a service, and you can achieve scale. So here in this case, we structured it so that the government utility, the state transport utility, purchases a service and not the bus itself. So we designed it as a 12-year contract. And why 12? Because in my mind, public mobility of this size is an infrastructure thing. It is an infrastructure asset. The minds of investors that I would like it to appeal to are infrastructure people, which means that they like size. Those kind of investors want certainty. Certainty in my mind was translated to long-term contracts. So I look at the world of renewable energy. These are long-term fixed contracts.
So when you say you're buying a service, just want to understand that. So you're saying basically you get a vehicle that's potentially on a lease, along with a vehicle maintenance plan, perhaps if needed a battery replacement through the life of the product. Is there anything else in that service?
It's an all-in service. You get a vehicle. The vehicle comes with its own driver.
Okay.
The vehicle comes with its efficiency
So
requirements.
his 55 rupees includes
Everything.
driver cost as well.
Driver, efficiency, quality maintenance, efficiency maintenance, battery replacement, every single thing is including the charger, is on the back of that private company.
And who does the underwriting for all this? That, the vehicle is going to be maintained for 12 years, battery will perform in such a such manner for, X number of years, and then there'll be a replacement.
When we were doing the tendering and when we were designing this, we only had 5 bus manufacturers in the country.
Yeah.
Thankfully for us, they're all big companies with big, huge legacies. They were all listed companies. So they were big, serious operators.
Yeah.
So the underwriting, there was almost no need for a third-party underwriting. We therefore just left it to the entity that did the bidding, so the entity that comes and provides the service. Of course, like all government contracts, you take financial guarantees, you take some bank guarantees and so on, but that's really a small piece of it. You have to trust the counterpart.
And you found that the manufacturers were quite open to this, taking that risk over the life of the asset?
I think they were okay to take the risk on the life of the asset. You mentioned open. They were open to taking these contracts until such time they were not anymore.
Yes.
The volumes were too big after some time. So, to your point on underwriting, we trusted the bidder because the bidders were big legacy. They have been making vehicles, maintaining vehicles. So, they're legacy players.
So, I've had this constant conversation with a lot of electric vehicle manufacturers that, and it doesn't matter what the size is, right? Ultimately, electric vehicles are new. And they need to go through some iteration, generational changes before you get them absolutely right. And until that time, manufacturers do need to kind of take some risk on the vehicle. Yeah, either on the residual value or maintenance, perhaps provide even buyback assurances on vehicles. But I find a lot of reluctance, and understandably so. Over the last few years, in the last 2 years especially, I've seen that is shifting now. Manufacturers realizing that we do need to do that if you have to sell our product, and it doesn't matter what sizes of the manufacturer is. So I see a fundamental shift, and I think that's really very good, because now, as a consequence of that, manufacturers giving a lot longer guarantees on their or warranties on their products as well, and that's increasing consumer confidence. And also, most people tell me that the biggest reason for low electric vehicle adoption is non-availability of financing. And I always say that it's not that there's lack of credit supply. Lenders, financiers, they want to deploy their money, but they want to deploy the money on good assets. So once you start creating good products, money will follow. I don't know if that's a very fair comment or not, but I see now that manufacturers realizing, okay, there are certain gaps in the product, and obviously once the product hits the road, you'll start seeing how it performs. Most electric vehicles today have not lived, even one life cycle yet. So actually nobody knows where this is going.
So there's a point of view on 2 sides, certainly on this, or maybe even 3 sides. There's a point of view from the customer, there's a point of view from the investor, and the point of view of the government. So If we were to start with the government back then, the worry was, well, if this technology doesn't work, what do I do?
Yeah.
I've already made the investment, I've already made the policy, I've released even the money and the subsidy, and then the technology doesn't work. Now, what do I do? You have to plug that. This is public money. The way to plug it is through these requirements. So in the buses, there is a requirement. It's still there that the manufacturer, the vehicle manufacturer, cannot exit the contract for an X number of years, certain number of years. The assumption then was that let's at least wait for it to stabilize.
When you say exit the contract, you mean running of the vehicles?
Running of the vehicle,
The full service package that you were talking
service
about.
package, right? So you can divest a portion of your equity, but never completely, and you cannot divest a portion of your equity until certain years into the contract. Because again, from the point of view of the government at that time, you wanted to make sure that if there was a technology problem, I'm speaking to the right person to try to fix it. Now, from the point of view of smaller vehicles, is also the consumer. What if it doesn't work? What do? I'm stuck with this. I bought it. I was told a lot of things, and if it doesn't work, then what would? With an investor, it's the same thing. In a lot of the vast majority of investors, of course, nobody wants to make a mistake, right? It's not many times it's their fund managers.
Yeah.
They are reporting to other institutional structures.
Yeah.
Everybody, of course, is always looking for data points that have shown to work. So, of course, is there a shortage of credit? No, I don't think so. But with every market, things take some time to prove the data points out that the business model is working. And I think in our electric vehicles market in the country, we're moving quite rapid. We don't need that much more policy support for two-wheelers and three-wheelers. The market itself will get competitive. Like you're saying, companies themselves are offering longer warranties. There was a time where companies were not taking their own vehicles back.
Yes.
And now I hope them taking the vehicles back is also their own confidence in the things they have purchased.
Absolutely.
In the batteries and other things that they purchased. Also, it's a question of survival. Right? There are others that will come in and do better.
You spoke about technology, whether it will work or not. So question is, for buses, is EV a good technology? Or will there be newer technologies soon, maybe hydrogen or something else coming very soon for large form vehicles?
For now, EVs cut it on costs.
Yeah.
It's cheaper.
Yeah.
It's just cheaper. It's cheaper to operate. And for a host of other benefits, including not having to purchase it, including leaving the efficiency to the private company, including putting the risks in the places or a host of other such benefits, that technology works today. It is demonstrated to work, and it is cheaper. Let's remind ourselves we're still a developing country, so affordability is certainly for any kind of public good or public infrastructure, affordability is the key, right? So for now, EV works. Until such time hydrogen comes in and beats it on cost. And the second point is on practicality. One, I don't think people talk as much as they should on how hard it is for our state utilities to run these buses. Because we have layers and layers of systems that are very old. We have institutions that have never handled these contracts before. These are software on wheels. We engage with them very differently from the way we used to deal with diesel or CNG or something else. So that execution is really hard work. It's toil. And hydrogen will meet that level of execution. Where will we fill? Our cities are being retrofitted. We're going to be dropping a hydrogen bus into an existing infrastructure. How do we make that work? So for as long as I'm hopeful, of course, very hopeful hydrogen comes in. It gives us the distance that we are not able to do with batteries for now. So absolutely, completely open. But as of now, maybe this is the technology for us. In the time that it takes for hydrogen to come in and beat on costs and beat on practicality, meaning feasibility of getting it done, appropriateness, we have a solution.
So, of course, through the work that you did, there was good adoption amongst the STUs, the state transport authorities. What about private operators? Are you seeing that they are beginning to adopt electric buses now? And what needs to be done over there?
Today, private operators want to move their fleet.
They want to.
They want to move their fleet, yes. I have spoken to at least 200 of them in the last few months. We started talking to private operators back in 2020 when we were working on electric and thinking, how do we do this? 2021, they were just not okay with the technology. We were worried about the technology. Does this battery thing even work? 2022, one of the first buses started coming in. There was curiosity. And curiosity was in a few states where we had the buses. 2023, the buses are there. You can see them in a lot of cities. So that perception really helped. Today, they want it. 2024, I haven't seen any operator who doesn't want it. Now, wanting is one thing. Second is affording. How can they go out and buy it? I think their biggest issue is to be able to go and afford this. It still costs 2.5 times that of their old diesel buses. And they don't just want one or two for show. They're doing it for a business, which means that somebody who owns 500 buses or manages 500 buses will have to figure out a way to purchase 500 buses or get them through some other kind of leasing or some other kind of solution, enable 500 buses. We don't have that yet.
And no, I think that maybe retrofitment of a lot of those old buses is a very good idea. I'm not sure how, and if you've seen that working practically. I've seen it in some forms. I think it seems like it works, but I don't think we've seen large-scale adoption of that.
Yes, we have not seen large-scale adoption of retrofitting, but of course, everything takes time, and if you want to move it faster, it has to be pushed. Retrofitting, I think, is one thing that has to be pushed. And
should it be pushed?
I think it needs to be pushed as an interim solution, not as our North Star, of course not, as an interim solution. And here's why I say that. In all of our vehicle categories, certainly with the bigger things, the more expensive, bigger items, the capex, heavy items, in many cases, when we get them out of one city, in our big cities, they end up going into the smaller cities. So it's not as if we've taken them out of our ground.
Yeah.
They're still there. 2, yes, we want the diesel vehicles out because of vehicular pollution issues. If the body is in a salvageable condition, as far as the environment is concerned, we're getting an electric in its place. It's not going to go on for another 20 years. It's an interim solution because the body itself will probably die in the next 5 to 7 years. So if you can time that the body itself absolutely can't make it beyond the time that the first round of the retrofitting will extend your life for about 7 more years. And if the body is in a decent condition, I just don't see why things like trucking, any kind of movement of goods, would not definitely want that. Now, the third element, which is the most causes me a little bit of worry, is issues around safety. And this is all to do with electric. It's not as if there's a safety cloud over any of it. But since you were talking about buses, and if you were to retrofit a school bus, even as much a little whiff of smoke coming out from the back for no reason, sometimes it just happens.
Yeah.
It's been happening. That will cause a lot of worry. And I don't feel good about that. So I think with retrofitting, it does need a push, but with a few more regulatory, let's say, boundary conditions around it. One big one would be a safety pledge or a safety protocol or some enhanced safety measure that will keep it, at least for us, certainly for the movement of inanimate objects, okay to do. And you're moving people in it, it's a little bit more. The concerns are a little deeper, naturally.
Okay. So, one of the main reasons why I want to do these conversations is because I want a lot of people to get inspired to work in sustainability, but more specifically in the EV industry. So I just want to, maybe shift focus a little bit on the new generation. And you have both been very closely been involved with educational institutions as well. So, and of course, with a lot of entrepreneurs. So I want to understand. So you helped set up Masters Union, which is, I guess, a little non-traditional in the way the courses are structured. Do you think that our education system needs to undergo some sort of a change? And also, whilst thinking about it, also, how does, if at all, how does the different new educational system focus on sustainability, electric vehicles? If there are any specific courses for that, would be good to understand.
Okay, before I come to that specific issue, let me tell you, the country is going through a huge evolution and multiple transitions. It's a massive transformation of this country. It's a million-year-old. I participated in telephony earlier, where we had 30 million fixed telephones, and you have to wait for 10, 15 years to get a phone.
Yes.
Today, you get a phone in 10, 15 seconds if you need a new SIM card. So we have seen that transition, and it was a bold decision of government to go to a digital technology, GSM, and skip analog technology.
Yeah.
And then it took few years to make it profitable for the industry and affordable for the consumer. Because these two are most important things. Profitable for the industry and affordable for the consumer. Takes time. Second is, as Mahua was saying, this transition of both renewable energy and EV. Both are going through the same evolution of profitable for the industry and affordable for the consumer. Exactly same evolution is happening in education sector. If the education sector, today you analyze, 90% plus is seeped in tradition. And there's a train incapacity in the entire sector. The same curriculum of 30 years old is being taught. With no linkage to future, no linkage to technologies, no linkage to employability. And that's really not good for the country. So I feel that the entire thesis of this evolution is about getting the profitability right of the new wave, getting the affordability right of the new wave, getting the evolution of technologies being utilized fully by us. Not one technology. There will be, for example, in telecom, it was 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, 6G now. And similarly in renewable energy, similarly in EV, new hydrogen, all the new technology will have to come and will have to be imbibed by us. And last but not the least, the creative business models. The old business models will not work. New business models will have to be innovated, tried, tested, and succeeded. In telecom, we did that new business model, which the world, nobody did it. Airtel led that model across the world. In EVs, as you said, EV buses, a new business model was found, which made it service-oriented. Same thing is happening in education. So in Masters Union, to come to specifically your question now, we went through the same, and Pratham is the founder. He is fantastic, young founder. And one thing which we said that we are an education firm, venture, and we'll not invest anything on real estate.
Okay.
As a starting point. We'll not invest crores of rupees in building a campus. We'll invest everything in the education, in the content, in the curriculum, in the what our teachers, professors need, but not in real estate. Because we're not a real estate company. We are an education company.
So this is similar to the service, buying the service rather
So
than...
we bought service on lease. And we said if the leasing charges are, let's say, about 5%
Hmm.
of the total fees we charge. That is viable.
Yeah.
There's no need to build and spend 500 crores on campuses. So we experimented that new model. Secondly, we decided we'll focus on entrepreneurs
Hmm.
rather than building employees. And that is what PM's vision is.
Yes.
Let's build young entrepreneurs rather than employees.
Hmm.
So that entrepreneurs can give employment to 10 more guys, 20 more. Third, we focused on technology. That let's not focus on old case studies of old companies, Indian or American. Let's focus on new technologies. So brand new technologies are being taught to students. And not only taught, but they are doing it themselves. And last but not the least, the change was on real industry. Real industrial life. So about more than half of our classes are taken by CXOs, who are real industry guys, not conceptual teachers. But they do it every day. So they teach the student what they do, what their experience is. So I feel that this change has been very refreshing. And the good news is that both the tests of evolution are passed. One, it's profitable as a school. And second, it is affordable for the students to come in, because we are going ahead of many Indian institutions, education institutions, which are very good institutions, and also definitely far ahead of international education institutions who charge in dollars. And it's so difficult for the country to pay billions and billions of dollars to American and Canadian and the English and Australian schools. So there's a school here. So it's a innovation which we have done, which is really getting to great success.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there'll be many, many masters union coming up in this country.
So just continuing on that thought, one thing I find is, when I look at our own team, a lot of them connect with our purpose, right? So we're working on electrification of last mile mobility, etc. A lot of the younger kids really like that. So should there be courses focused on things like electric vehicles and obviously everything that goes around it? And do you think universities, institutions will start creating some courses like that?
Absolutely. It has already started. Many universities have initiated sustainability programs, and they're focused on courses on EVs, courses on renewable energy, courses on many new other technologies. So I think the movement has started. But there are many institutions who are steeped in history. For them to change and do such things is not easy, because the entire mindset is different. So it may take some time in some old institutions. But I think the newer institutions definitely are on the way.
And Mahua, you've done some work with IIM Ahmedabad on climate courses.
I must give credit to IIM Ahmedabad for this. Is it 2025? This would be my 10th or 15th year
Wow.
of an association with IIM Ahmedabad. I never went there. I didn't study there. But back in 2009 is when professors at IIM Ahmedabad, Dr. Shukla and at that time Amit Garg, who was doing his PhD, if I recall, reached out and said, I think we'd like to put out a course on carbon credits. At that time it was to do with carbon credits. I was not in the country and reached out saying, I think, would you be able to help us design a course syllabus? And I remember getting, one of those things in your career, you feel like, oh, this is brilliant. This is just so nice that an educational institution wants to know course, the proper way, teach the economics of it and put it out there. So I must credit IIM Ahmedabad for having that foresight and having that, at least that, the conviction at that time to do it. And for many years, I was a guest lecturer at IIM Ahmedabad. Some years ago, that changed over to an executive education course. So to Manoj's point, though, it's not easy for these institutions that are steeped in legacy, steeped in methods, and steeped in a certain way of giving recognition to what a degree even constitutes, to now put in a course and have to deal with questions around where does it sit? Is it an elective? Is it, will I get a job with it? Will my students get placed? So both sides have these concerns, and they had those concerns a little bit in the earlier days. Today, things are a little different. the crowd that we see in executive education courses are people who come with about 20 years of experience. We did one that was only for PSGs because their language is a little bit different. We did one only for government, and then we did one for anybody else. And I'm quite heartened that in executive education courses, these are people at 2025. They're not coming there just because they have a budget to use for organizational training and so on. They're coming there with real questions. Our case studies, we're using as much as we can local case studies that are contemporary. These are companies that are going through issues. Not all of them have won with their own issues. Some have even are in the process of struggling through it. So I must credit some of these institutions that are doing this. There is a demand. It's not just the institutions. Many institutions, over time have started responding to their own student base. Students are wanting this. A lot of the newer entrants in these master's degrees are asking for these sort of courses. So their view of the world perhaps a little bit different from the students of my time when we were entering college, and the view of the world and, assurance of, I'd get a good job doing this sustainability stuff.
You spoke about carbon credits and carbon markets. Probably we'll have a separate, larger focused discussion on that. But I think just maybe a last word from both of you. Like I said, the idea is basically, from my perspective, to inspire a lot of new entrepreneurs to get into the EV sector. Any sort of message, last words for them before we wrap up?
No, I met an entrepreneur yesterday, young entrepreneur. You know him, Pulkit. Battery
Smart, yeah.
And I could feel after meeting him that he's in the right direction. And he's got into the sector at the right time. He is expanding slowly, steadily, making each city profitable. So step-by-step growth, very good organization, very clear support to all the EV companies for battery swapping, etc., etc. So that's the way. You need to have your mission clear. We need to have a step-by-step approach because we have to make the business profitable. We need to, India is so huge market. So no hurry, no impatience. Just execute with quality, execute with passion, and you'll win it.
Perfect. Anything, Vyoma?
I think one other thing to add, nothing major to add, it's that we're a very large economy. There's space for a lot of things. There's space for a lot of goods to be sold and services to be sold and methods. And one of the last piece I would just add to Manoj's point, whereas Indians are capable of receiving a lot of different things and be okay with differences. So when companies appeal to you, there's a lot of willingness of a consumer to listen to you. And I think that's a really great quality of us as a crowd of an Indian nation. That a lot of things sell because we have a lot of desires across the board. So there's no dearth. I think it's hard to say anything more than that there is a space for a lot of things. You have to find your space to find that clicks.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both for the candid conversations, for sharing stories, and for reminding us that leadership isn't a title, it's an energy, one that powers people, progress, and purpose. Until next time, keep charging forward. Thanks for tuning in. If this conversation sparked new thoughts, share them. If it sparked new questions, ask them. This is EV Powering India, and we are just getting started.